The city had its own rhythm, something between the pulse of a living creature and the hollow echo of a decaying machine. I wasn't sure which of the two categories Hollywood fit into, but one thing was certain: no one survives here without losing something along the way. Their soul, their dreams, or, in my case, their sanity. When I moved to Los Angeles 6 years ago, I was searching for the same things as so many others: glory, fame, a place in the sun. I was a screenwriter, or at least I wanted to be. I had an idea in my head and a few connections, but I knew that with time, I would make my name. Hollywood was a tempting promise, with its bright lights, and everyone said all you needed was to be in the right places with the right people. But no one tells you the cost of that pursuit. Choosing the name to sign my first contract was my first concession to the darkness I didn't yet understand. Samir Ruiz, exotic enough, but not too strange. The name resonated well in the small production circles, and doors started to open, albeit slowly and hesitantly. Small horror films, independent productions no one would ever hear of. I wrote about haunted houses, failed exorcisms, and masked serial killers. I didn't care. I knew that eventually I'd get my chance to write something truly new. That's when I met Vic Kavanaugh. Vic was a legend in the world of horror. Director, producer, and screenwriter, he was known for deeply unsettling the audience's psyche. His films didn't just scare, they left scars. After watching one of his films, people had such vivid nightmares that it was hard to distinguish the line between reality and dream. His works didn't just guarantee astronomical box office returns, they left an indelible mark on anyone daring to watch them. When I got a call from Vic, saying he was looking for a screenwriter for a special project, I could hardly believe my luck. He mentioned that he had heard about me. What surprised me was that he didn't explain where or from whom, just that he liked my style. The opportunity to work with someone like him felt surreal. This was what I had worked for. The contract arrived the next day, in a black briefcase, delivered by a nameless messenger. I knew something was wrong. Nobody in Hollywood delivers contracts personally, especially not to someone like me. Inside the case, besides the contract, was a manuscript. It was a pile of yellowed, worn pages, as if they had passed through many hands over several decades. The title at the top sent a chill down my spine: The Beast of Hollywood. That same night, I sat down to read it. From the start, something about the story unsettled me. It wasn't the graphic content. I had read countless descriptions of brutal deaths and sordid settings. What disturbed me was the feeling the text conveyed. There was something pulsing in the words, a kind of hidden energy that seemed to come directly from within the paper. The narrative spoke of a dark figure lurking behind the scenes of Hollywood since the beginning of its history, an invisible entity that fed on the failures, fears, and ambitions of all who dared to seek success. Those who knew the secret of the beast made a pact. In exchange for their souls, they received the power to create the perfect horror. Directors and writers who made the pact were guaranteed immediate success and recognition, but the price was high. Most didn't survive long enough to enjoy the glory. At the end of the reading, I found a handwritten note on the last pages, written in red ink. The words were scrawled hastily, making me hold my breath for a moment. The beast isn't just a legend, it's real, and once you read about it, it finds you. Be careful with the films we make. Be careful with what we summon when we write horror. The signature below was from a famous director from the 80s who mysteriously disappeared at the height of his career. I should have stopped there, but something pulled me in, an insatiable curiosity, as if I was being guided by something beyond myself. I couldn't shake the idea of the beast. The concept hung over me like an invisible shadow, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't rid myself of the unease. The next morning I called Vic. I needed answers. "So, you read it?" he said as soon as he answered, not even giving me a chance to speak. "I did. But I don't know what you expect from me, Vic. Is this a screenplay or something else? Because it feels more like an urban legend than a film proposal." He laughed, but it was dry, devoid of any humor. "Ah, Samir, this is much more than a screenplay. The beast is real. And if you want to be part of true success, you'll have to accept that." I thought he was joking, trying to play a prank on me. But there was something in his voice that made me hesitate. Vic continued, his voice low but loaded with a cold certainty. "We'll meet tonight. I'll explain everything." Vic's office was in the heart of Hollywood, surrounded by imposing skyscrapers. But the building itself was old, almost decrepit, with a facade that had seen better days. I went up to his floor with a growing sense of unease. When I entered, Vic was already waiting. He sat in a black leather chair, watching me with piercing eyes that seemed to see through me. "Did you like the manuscript?" he asked casually, as if the story I had read wasn't the most disturbing thing I'd ever laid hands on. "It's interesting, but it feels more like a metaphor for the dark side of the industry." Vic smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Metaphor? No, Samir. The beast is real, and it's closer than you think." I laughed, trying to lighten the tension. "This is just part of the game, isn't it? You're trying to scare me so I can get into the mindset of writing horror." But Vic didn't laugh. He watched me in silence, and the room seemed to shrink around us. "You've already felt it. It's here, Samir. Here. Now." I wanted to leave, but something held me. Like I was rooted to the ground, unable to move. His words echoed in my head, and as absurd as they seemed, something inside me believed them. The beast has been in Hollywood since the beginning. Those who know its secret make the pact, and the beast guarantees success. But it demands sacrifices, and once you accept it, there's no going back. "This is madness," I said, trying to convince myself as much as him. "It is madness," Vic agreed, his voice calm. "But it's the madness that created the greatest horror films you've ever seen, and now you're in its hands." That night, I returned to my apartment with a pounding headache. I wanted to believe it was all a trick, a setup to prepare me psychologically for the job. But as the days passed, the feeling of being watched intensified. It wasn't paranoia. There was something there, in the shadows of my apartment, watching me. Writing became an impossible task. I felt drained, as if each word was stealing a piece of my soul. The whispers started a few days later. At first, they were small noises, sounds that seemed to come from the dark corners of the apartment. I ignored them, blaming stress. But over time they grew louder, clearer, indistinct whispers, as if 2 or 3 people were conversing in the walls around me. Even when I left home, I felt the presence. It followed me, lurking in the corners, hiding in the shadows of buildings, on the streets of Los Angeles. Vic, of course, said it was all part of the process. "You need to feel the fear to write it, Samir. The beast has already found you. Now you just need to accept it." I laughed at first, as a defense against the absurd idea that something supernatural could be behind Hollywood's success. But as the weeks went by, things started to get worse. I had recurring nightmares of a figure in the shadows, always lurking, always watching. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart racing, feeling as if someone was in the room with me. Isabel, my sister, started calling me more often, worried about my silence. "Samir, are you okay? It's been weeks since I last spoke to you." Her call brought me back to reality for a moment. I hadn't realized how much I was isolating myself. Isabel was all I had. Since our parents died in a car accident, it had been just the 2 of us. She had always been my anchor, the person who kept me grounded. "I'm fine, just busy," I lied, trying to reassure her. But the truth was, I no longer knew if I was truly okay. Vic kept pressuring me. He called almost every night, always insisting that I needed to feel the beast, to understand its true power. He talked about Hollywood as if it were a graveyard of lost souls, people who had sacrificed everything for a moment of glory, only to be consumed by something bigger than themselves. At first I thought it was just an exaggerated metaphor, but now I was starting to think he was serious. It was during one of those nights that he called me to his office again. This time, something was different. The building, which had once seemed merely run down, now felt empty, as if it were dead. When I entered, Vic was waiting as usual, but his expression was darker, more intense. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked bluntly. "The beast. It's already here, Samir. It's watching you. It's waiting for you to complete the pact." "I don't believe in that." I lied, but my voice wasn't as firm as I would have liked. "It doesn't matter if you believe or not," he said, slowly rising to his feet. "The beast has already chosen you. Now, You have to decide what you're going to do with that power. What power? You're telling me that success in Hollywood depends on a pact with a supernatural entity? That's ridiculous. Vic smiled, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that truly scared me. It wasn't insanity, it was certainty. Everyone who reaches true success makes the pact, Samir. Hughes, Carpenter, Craven, they all knew the beast. They accepted it, and in return, they created works the world will never forget. This is madness, I murmured, trying to find a way out of the conversation. It is, Vic said calmly. But it's the madness that shapes Hollywood. And now, you're on the verge of something great. You just need to take the next step. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run from Vic and all his insanity. But the truth was, part of me was curious. And that curiosity was like poison, spreading through my veins, eating me from the inside out. That night I went home with a heaviness in my chest that I couldn't explain. Vic's words, as absurd as they seemed, echoed in my mind like a persistent hum. I tried to ignore them, but something inside me, something I didn't want to admit, was already beginning to believe. He spoke with such certainty, as if the reality he described was inevitable, and the more I tried to resist, the more the idea of the beast infiltrated my subconscious. The following weeks became a blur. My once organized and disciplined writing routine began to fall apart. I spent hours in front of the screen, but the words wouldn't come. The writer's block I had always feared now seemed like an insurmountable wall. Every attempt to move forward with the script was frustrating, as if something inside me was resisting the idea of writing. More than that, the nights became unbearable. The whispers, which I once thought were a side effect of stress, intensified. I could hear them clearly now, like voices from some deep, distant place, but always present. They whispered my name, secrets I couldn't understand. Sometimes they sounded like faint laughter, mocking me as I huddled in my bed, trying to drown out the sound with a pillow. But no matter what I did, the whispers were always there, persistent. It was during one of those nights that something happened. I woke up with a strange sensation, as if there were someone in the room with me. My eyes opened slowly, and the darkness around me seemed thicker than usual. It was as if the shadows had taken form, shifting on the walls, doors, and corners of the room. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. It's just your mind playing tricks on you, I told myself. But deep down I knew it was more than that. The feeling of being watched was unbearable, and then I heard it. It wasn't just whispers anymore. It was breathing, slow, deep, as if someone, or something, was right beside me. I slowly turned my head to the corner of the room, and there it was. I couldn't see it clearly, but there was a figure, a tall, slender human shape, wrapped in shadows. It didn't move, but I knew it was watching me. My lungs seized. For a few seconds I was frozen, unable to react. Then suddenly, the figure dissolved into the shadows, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. I wanted to believe it was a dream, a hallucination caused by stress, but the feeling of presence, the cold that had filled the room, was too real to ignore. That night, I stayed awake until dawn, staring at the corner where the figure had appeared. The next day, Vic called me again. His voice was colder than usual, as if he already knew what I had experienced. "You're almost there, Samir," he said bluntly. "The beast is getting closer. It senses that you're ready." Ready for what? My voice came out weaker than I wanted. I hated that I was starting to fear what he was saying. "For the pact," he replied. "You know what you have to do. Every great creator must sacrifice something. That's the price of success. You've come too far to turn back now." I wanted to scream at him, to tell him it was all madness, but deep down, I knew he was right. I felt the presence of the beast everywhere now. It was circling me, waiting for the right moment to strike. And, as much as I tried to resist, there was a part of me that desired it. I wanted the success. I wanted to write something that would be remembered forever. But at what cost? That's when I remembered Isabel, my sister, my only anchor of sanity amid the chaos. I hadn't seen her in weeks, since I had buried myself in that project. I remembered the last time we spoke on the phone, her soft, worried voice trying to reach me. "Samir, are you okay? It's been a while since I've heard from you." I called her that afternoon, but she didn't answer. I left a message, trying to sound carefree, but my voice trembled. Something was wrong. I knew it. I decided I needed to see her. I got in the car and drove to her apartment, trying to shake the feeling that I was being followed. The streets of Los Angeles were quieter than usual, and the traffic flowed as if the world around me was slowing down, giving me time to think. Arriving at Isabel's building, I knocked on the door repeatedly, but no one answered. I asked the neighbors if they had seen my sister. One of them, a middle-aged woman, looked at me with a confused expression. "She moved out a few days ago," the woman said, adjusting her glasses. "Didn't say where she was going, just that she needed to leave for a while." My senses sharpened. Isabel would never do that without telling me. The fear I felt of losing my grip on reality now amplified. Was I losing Isabel too? I returned to the car with trembling hands. I didn't know what to do. Back at my apartment, I tried calling her again, but nothing. I spent the night staring at the phone, waiting for a response that never came. And then, the whispers returned. They were louder now, more insistent. The shadows in my room began to stir again, dancing on the walls as if they were alive. I knew the beast was getting closer, and I knew Vic was right. The pact was about to be sealed. The next morning I received another call from Vic. This time his tone was definitive, almost authoritarian. "The time has come, Samir. Come to my office tonight and bring something important, something personal. You know what you need to do." I knew, and I hated what it meant. Vic hadn't mentioned it directly, but I understood what he was implying. The something personal wasn't just an object, it was a sacrifice. And I knew, with crushing clarity, that the beast wanted Isabel. She had always been my anchor, the person who kept me grounded in reality, who reminded me of who I really was. Sacrificing Isabel would be the price the beast demanded, and deep down, I knew that by accepting that price, my life would change forever. Success would come, but the cost would be immeasurable. I thought about running, just leaving everything behind and never seeing Vic again. But somehow, I knew that wasn't possible. The beast was already with me. Running wasn't an option. It would follow me to the end of my days. And so that night, I took something I knew would be the perfect sacrifice. An old, crumpled photo of Isabel and me when we were kids. The image was faded, but still clear enough to see the innocent smile on her face. I knew that by sacrificing that photo, I was sacrificing much more than a piece of paper. I was burning the last connection that tied me to the real world. I drove to Vic's office with a heavy heart. The building looked even gloomier than the last time. The lights on Vic's floor were on, but there was an oppressive darkness around it. I climbed the stairs slowly, feeling each step weigh like lead. When I entered, Vic was already waiting for me. He was sitting behind his desk, a satisfied smile on his face. "Did you bring what I asked for?" he asked bluntly. I nodded, pulling the photo from my pocket and placing it on the desk. Vic looked at it for a moment, then at me. He smiled, as if he already knew what I had decided. "Good," he said calmly. "Now burn it." I hesitated for a moment. Burning that photo was more than symbolic. It was destroying the last pure memory I had of Isabel. But I knew that was what the beast wanted. And so, with trembling hands, I held the photo over the flame of a candle Vic had lit. The edges began to darken, and the paper twisted, slowly being consumed by the fire. As the photo crumbled into ashes, something shifted in the air around us. The shadows in the room began to move, as if they were alive, and the temperature dropped drastically. I felt a deep cold in my chest, like something was being ripped out of me. Vic just watched, his eyes fixed on mine, as the room seemed to pulse with an invisible energy. "Congratulations, Samir," he murmured, his voice now lower, almost reverent. "You now belong to the beast." From that moment on, everything changed. The ideas for the script began to flow like never before. I wrote for hours on end, unable to stop, the words appearing in my mind as if an invisible force was guiding me. The script that had once seemed like a challenge now built itself with frightening precision. Scenes of horror so vivid and disturbing that I knew the world would never forget them. Vic was pleased. He knew I had completed the pact. I had offered something of value, and in return, the beast was now working through me. Every word I wrote was an invocation, every scene an offering, and the world would soon see the result. But what I didn't expect was the price. It wasn't just Isabel's photo I had burned that night. I had burned our connection. Since then, I started having terrible dreams about her. She would appear, crying, screaming my name, reaching out to me from a dark, empty place. And worse, I started to forget her face. Each day that passed, her features became more blurred, more distant, as if she were disappearing from my memory. I tried calling her several times, but she never answered. When I went to her apartment, I discovered that she had disappeared. No one knew where she was, and it seemed like she had vanished from the face of the earth. Isabel's disappearance ate away at my heart. She wasn't just my sister. She was the only person who kept me grounded in what remained of my humanity. Now, as my career flourished, with my script being praised and fought over by studios, none of it seemed to matter. I had lost Isabel, and I knew it was my fault. When I finally managed to sleep that night, the nightmares returned. But this time, they weren't just fragments. Isabel was there, in the same dark, empty place as always. She looked at me with a desperate expression, as if she was trying to tell me something, but her words were muffled by the whispers that filled the air around us. The shadows moved like serpents, wrapping around her arms, pulling her away from me, and when I tried to run to save her, my feet were stuck to the ground. I woke up with my heart racing, drenched in sweat. The clock read 3 a.m. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep again. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the living room, staring into the void, thinking about what I had done. Vic had talked about the price. He had mentioned that the beast demanded sacrifices, but I hadn't imagined that the sacrifice would be Isabel. She wasn't just distant now. I had lost her. I didn't know where she was, or if she was even alive. That photo I burned represented more than I could comprehend at the time. I had severed the last link with my sister, and now I was alone in the world. The days that followed were a blur. The offers began pouring in. Producers, directors, and studios competed for my script. Everyone talked about how my story was unique, visceral, something that transcended conventional horror. They spoke about how my work evoked a sense of unease that lingered with the viewer for days. It was exactly the kind of response I had always wanted, but now it felt empty. I wondered if those praising my work could sleep at night, if they too would be haunted by the presence of the beast. Because for me, there was no more rest. Even during the day, the shadows seemed longer, darker. When I left the house, I felt like something was following me, watching my every move. I knew it was there. The beast was always present, always waiting. Vic seemed to be at the peak of his career. The success of the film we were about to release put him back in the spotlight. He made sure to include me in all the events, interviews, and meetings. To the public, I was the promising new name in horror, the screenwriter who had brought something truly terrifying to the screen. But to me, none of that mattered anymore. All I could think about was Isabel and what the beast had done to her. As the film's release date approached, the nightmares worsened. It was no longer just Isabel in my dreams. Now, other figures appeared, people I didn't know but who somehow seemed familiar. They were men and women, all with expressions of pain and despair, as if they were trapped in the same dark place where Isabel was. They screamed, but their cries were muffled by the same whispers that filled my dreams. I knew what it meant. Those people were other victims of the beast, souls that, like Isabel, had been sacrificed to feed its power. I went to Vic's office again, but this time not to discuss the script or the film. I needed answers. Vic, I began as soon as I entered. He was behind his desk, flipping through some documents, but his gaze immediately turned to me. I need to know. What happened to my sister? He sighed, as if he had been expecting the question. He closed the papers and leaned back in his chair. Samir, you know what happened. You made the pact. The beast demands sacrifices, and your sister was the price you paid for it. But she can't really be dead, can she? My voice trembled, and I hated how desperate I sounded. Vic remained silent for a moment, then shook his head. She's not dead, Samir. Not in the way you think, but she's beyond your reach now. The beast has her. She's been taken to a place where we mortals can't reach her. My stomach churned. I wanted to believe there was still hope, that somehow I could bring her back. But Vic seemed certain that wasn't possible. So why did you bring me into this? Why put me in this situation if I was going to lose the most important person in my life? I asked, my voice shaking with anger and frustration. Vic gave an enigmatic smile. Because you had something the beast wanted, something I no longer had. Youth, pure ambition, the willingness to sacrifice anything for success. You were the perfect offering. And besides, you have talent. What you've created is something that will be remembered for generations. The price was high, but you achieved what many never will. I fell silent, trying to process his words. The anger boiled inside me, but it was mixed with something worse, the realization that, on some level, Vic was right. I had accepted the pact. I wanted success more than anything, and now that I had it, I was being consumed by it. But there was still one thing I needed to know. And what about you, Vic? What did you sacrifice? Vic's smile faded for a moment. His eyes darkened, and he leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. I sacrificed a lot, Samir. More than you can imagine. My soul, my human connections. Everything was consumed by the beast, but in return, it gave me power. It gave me a career that would never have been possible otherwise. And now it's given that to you. Oh, but you're still here, I countered. You didn't lose anyone like I lost Isabel. Vic laughed, but it was a bitter, almost sad laugh. Oh, Samir, you think you know everything, but you still don't understand. I lost more than you could ever imagine. You think you were the only one to sacrifice a soul? The beast demanded much from me over the years. Family, friends, people I cared about, they all disappeared, just like your sister. But the difference is, over time, I learned not to care. That's the true power of the beast. It doesn't just take what you love, it changes you, until you're incapable of feeling anything for those who are gone. My mind reeled as I processed what Vic was saying. The truth was darker than I could have imagined. The beast didn't just demand external sacrifices, it also consumed what was left of your humanity. And Vic was already completely empty. I backed away from his desk, unable to continue listening. He had fully accepted the beast, and now he was just a shell of what he once was. I didn't want that fate for myself. I couldn't let the beast consume me the same way. That night, I went home determined to find a way to undo what I had done. I spent hours online, researching everything I could about legends of pacts, entities, and rituals of annulment. The more I read, the more desperate I became. Nothing seemed helpful. Everything indicated that once the pact was sealed, there was no turning back. But then, in the midst of my frustration, I came across something that caught my attention. It was an old occult forum where users shared stories of rituals and supernatural experiences. One post, in particular, mentioned a reversal ritual, something that, theoretically, could break the bond with an entity like the beast. The problem was that the ritual required another sacrifice, the sacrifice of someone who had originally sealed the pact, Vic. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew what it meant. If I wanted to bring Isabel back, I would have to confront Vic, and it wouldn't be a simple conversation. I wasn't ready to kill anyone. I had never imagined my life could reach this point. But now, I was at a dead end. If I did nothing, Isabel would be lost forever, and I would end up like Vic, a hollow shell, trapped in an endless cycle of sacrifices. I spent the night awake, weighing my options, trying to find a way out that didn't involve more blood. But deep down, I knew there was no other solution. The beast demanded sacrifices, and if I wanted to break the pact, I would have to offer it someone who was already corrupted, someone who had made countless sacrifices in its name, Vic. The next day, I went to Vic's office for the last time. This time, I entered with a clear purpose. The shadows that always seemed to surround me were now calm, as if they knew what was about to happen. Vic greeted me as he always did, with that enigmatic smile that now disgusted me. "Samir, what brings you here today?" he asked casually, as if everything were normal. I sat down in the chair in front of his desk, looking directly into his eyes. "I know how to break the pact." Vic raised an eyebrow, curious. "Oh, really? And how do you plan on doing that?" "I need a sacrifice," I replied bluntly. "Someone who's already made the pact. Someone like you." Vic's smile disappeared. For a moment he stared at me in silence as if processing my words. And then, he laughed. A low, almost hysterical laugh. "You think you can kill me, Samir? You think you can just undo what's been done? The beast won't allow it. It needs me. No, I said, with a calmness that even surprised me. It doesn't need you anymore. Now it has me. Vic stood up, his expression shifting from curiosity to something darker. You're making a mistake, Samir. If you kill me, the beast won't set you free. It'll consume you. It'll turn you into what I am. I won't let that happen, I replied, my voice steady. I'm not like you, Vic, and I'm going to save my sister no matter the cost. Vic took a step forward, his presence now more threatening than ever. You don't understand. You can't just undo the pact. There's no escaping the beast. It will hunt you down, just as it did with all of us. I knew there was no turning back. I pulled out the knife I had brought with me and delivered the first blow. Blood poured from Vic, but he didn't fall immediately. His eyes widened, and he tried to step back, but I held him firm. I delivered another blow, and another, until he finally collapsed to the ground. His breathing grew weak, and he tried to speak, but his words were only a whisper. The shadows in the room began to stir, and I knew the beast was there, watching. I'm sorry, I murmured, looking at Vic's body. But there was no other way. The shadows moved closer, engulfing Vic's body, and within seconds he disappeared completely, as if he had never been there. I felt a strange relief, but I knew it wasn't over yet. The price had been paid. I returned home, waiting, not knowing exactly what to expect. That night, the nightmares returned, but this time, they were different. Isabel was there again, but something had changed. She was no longer trapped. She smiled, a weak but relieved smile. Thank you, Samir, she whispered, and then I woke up. The beast was still there, in the shadows. It would never completely go away, but I had broken the cycle. Isabel was free, and deep down, I knew I would never be the same.